Xenophon, please.
Issues in relation to defence. Direct a question at Rear Admiral Samet, if he's available. Thank you.
Senator Xenophon.
Rear Admiral Samet, you're the head of the Future Submarine Project, that's correct?
Rear Admiral Samet, head of the Future Submarine Program. That is correct, Senator.
Thank you. And who was your predecessor? Who's your predecessor, Admiral? Was that Rear Admiral?
Rear Admiral Rowan Moffat, Senator.
Yes. When did you take over from him?
In September of 2013.
Now, in about May 2014, Ernst & Young received a contract for the C1000 project by way of an open tender for $462,000 to conduct financial modelling services. Do you recall that contract, and did you sign off on it?
I recall the contract with Ernst & Young. It was broader than just cost modelling at that time. It was some strategic business advice as well.
In relation to the submarine program?
In relation to the Future Submarine Program.
Sure. Now, according to LinkedIn, Admiral Moffat, perhaps after some period of leave, commenced work with Ernst & Young in September 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
At about the same time, Ernst & Young received another contract by way of open tender for $520,000 to provide corporate services for C1000. Do you recall that contract, and did you sign off on it?
I'll need to take that on notice, Senator, as to whether I signed off on that particular contract or whether the then General Manager of Submarines signed off on that contract.
Right. It was for open tender. Do you recollect what stood out in your mind as to reason why Ernst & Young were better than any other tenderer? Could you
just say the date again of that contract, please, Senator?
That contract was about the same time. This would have been around September 2014. I've got the contracts here in front of me. This was for $520,000 to provide corporate services for C1000.
So that was around, as I recall, around August of 14.
Okay. So
okay.
I said September.
We're probably talking about the same contract?
Yes, we are.
Well, in terms of corporate advisor support, there were a number of people who presented for that. We selected Ernst & Young at the time because of their understanding of the scale of the program, their appreciation of the issues that would come into corporate advice for such a program, their understanding also of the matters that pertain to contracts of the size that we were contemplating for the Future Submarine Program going forward.
Okay. So, in the tender response from Ernst & Young, was Mr Moffat nominated as a key person from their side in terms of the tender process?
I don't recall him as being nominated. It was another member of their team who was nominated as the advisor for that.
So, following on from that Ernst & Young contract, they received two further contracts, also by open tender, to provide corporate services to the Future Submarine Project, one for $1,100,000 and the other for exactly double that, $2,200,000. Do you recollect those contracts?
No, I don't. Senator, could you, again, do you have a time frame for those?
No, but I can provide that. I can put some further questions on notice in respect to that. But,
right.
But that was that followed on. It seems that Ernst & Young had a number of contracts. Now, prior to Admiral Moffat leaving the Navy, had Ernst & Young ever had a contract for the C1000 project?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator, as to whether they did or didn't.
According to the searches that were undertaken on AusTender, we couldn't find any. But if that's, it just seems that Ernst & I mean, what do you do in circumstances where you have a former senior, under the rules, a former senior naval officer who had the conduct of the submarine program going to a major consultancy, and then suddenly they seem to get a number of contracts? Is that is that just the way it is? If you've got that expertise in defence and you've shifted from defence to a private organisation,
No,
it
Senator,
gives you...
what I do recall about the contracts that I was involved in terms of Ernst & Young's involvement in the program, was that it was on the basis of the expertise that they were bringing. It wasn't predicated on the involvement of anybody else that may have been connected with the Future Submarine program. There is a period of abstinence from further employment in relation to matters connected with the Future Submarine program or any defence
Something
matter.
that people call unkindly gardening leave, but what is that period?
It varies, as I understand, from time to time, depending on the circumstances and the individuals involved, and that's normally by their agreement before they leave defence.
So there's no set time?
I'll need to take further advice on what sort of set
anyone
time
tell
that we
me?
normally apply to that.
I thought there was...
I've not been in those circumstances yet.
Senator,
And I hope you won't be for quite some time.
Mr Gillis?
Senator Kim Gillis, Deputy Secretary, Capability Acquisition and Sustainment, having participated in that process myself, having left it was 12 months for me. I left the country for 12 months and worked on non-Australian defence related, and that's a normal requirement. But sometimes when people are working above the line, in other words, working directly for the Commonwealth, they're not in a conflict. We do make exceptions.
On notice, could you just, it concerns me, I just want to know how clear the rules are, what the timeframes are, and I understand the exception that you've referred to, but I just want to know what the parameters are and whether they're set out clearly.
It is 12 months.
It is 12 months?
It's 12 months.
I'll take the rest of your question on notice, Senator.
Right, thank you. Can I go, Admiral Samet, can I just go to advice provided to this committee is that you approve two contracts in relation to Mr Peter Baxter, one for $71,184.48, or a bit over $71,000, and $89,314. Are you familiar with those contracts?
Yes, I'm
Mr.
familiar with
Baxter?
those contracts.
Okay. Can you, now this is the same Peter Baxter that was formerly the Deputy Secretary. We're talking about the same person.
That's correct,
Okay.
Senator.
And a Deputy Secretary is pretty senior. It's an SES Band 2, would that be right?
Band 3,
Band 3?
a Deputy Secretary.
Yep. Under what circumstances did Mr Baxter leave Defence? Was it a case of his contract expiring? Was it a case of resigning? Was he told that his... Yeah.
Senator Brendan Sargent, Acting Secretary. Mr Baxter retired.
Right, okay, so that's fine. So it was a question he retired. When did Mr Baxter leave Defence? Because I think Rebecca Skinner took over that role in September 2016.
I will have to get the exact and precise date for you, Senator. I don't
Does
recall.
anyone know?
Mr Baxter left towards at the end of June in 2016.
Okay, so can you tell me when these two contracts were signed? Because do you recollect? I've got a date that I understand it is, but I'd rather you tell me so I don't get that wrong.
The contract was signed on the, I believe it was the 1st of December 2016.
Okay, so he left Defence in the middle of the year. The contract was signed within about 6 months. So how does that go, Mr Gillis, in terms of that 12-month
Senator,
role?
I said the exception is of those people who are working above the line, in other words, working directly for the Commonwealth,
Yep.
not in a competitive process. The design, the structure of having people excluded, which is actually in our common law employment agreements for 12 months, is to stop potential perceptions of misconduct when you're actually working with one of the tendering companies. It's different when you're actually working directly for the Commonwealth.
Okay, so thank you. So in this case, Rear Admiral Samet, the work he was engaged to do was as advisory support for the Future Submarine project.
That's correct, Senator.
Okay, and he would have obtained most of that knowledge. That knowledge would have been knowledge he would have obtained in his time working for government.
Well,
In
I
fact,
can-
that's why we contracted him, Senator.
Yeah.
I can
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment? I mean, Mr Baxter was an experienced diplomat. It's an important project. We're developing a project which significantly enhances the relationship with France. and Mr. Baxter had a set of skills which were available to us because he was living in Europe as a result of his personal circumstances, and it was a very good opportunity to make use of those skills for the betterment of the project and for the work that had to be done in establishing the project.
I'm just trying to establish. I do want to go to the issue of the thresholds of some of these contracts in a moment in relation to Mr. Gould, but it's fair to say that Mr. Baxter is not a former submariner, was involved in design. He's not a former submariner or involved in submarine design or build, or had anything to do specifically with submarines, but it's principally his diplomatic or strategic knowledge.
He was heavily involved in the relationship with France and developing the agreements, the MOUs, the treaty.
So it's strategic, basically.
It's strategic based, and
it's not technical. It's strategic.
No, it was. That's exactly right. In support of those technical contracts.
Sure. I just want to go to the issue of Mr. Gould's contract, which has been subject of some media commentary, and in fact that's when I first heard about it. There was some reluctance on part of, and I direct this to you, to the Acting Secretary, there was some reluctance on the part of Defence to agree to send the signatory to this contract to estimates on the account of the fact that she was an EL2. I guess what concern, and I understand that that person is overseas working, and I think it would have been unreasonable to incur taxpayers' expense to bring them back just for estimates. As valuable as estimates are, I don't think I could even justify that.
I'll remind you that one goes into.
Well, if it's Europe, I think anything more than 12 hours, anything more than 15 hours flight, Minister, we might draw the line there. I guess what I find curious, to put this to the Secretary, to the Acting Secretary, there was resistance initially for that person to be called, but they were responsible enough to, they had the authority to, they had the delegated authority to sign a contract for someone to do $75,000 worth of work for 1 month. But the department took the view initially that they weren't prepared for that person to come and be accountable for their actions in terms of signing that contract for $75,000 for a month's work. I'm just trying to understand whether there will be a change of heart from the department. If you had the authority to sign a contract, surely that should be enough to be able to answer questions and estimates.
The accountable officer was Mr. Johnson, who was the division head, and
but Mr. Johnson didn't sign it though, did he?
No, but he
Senator, he did actually sign a part of the contract. It's the Section 23 delegation.
Right.
So there's actually two parts of it. There's the contractual signature and there's the authorisation.
and so the EL2 was, I suppose, fulfilling a technical requirement, and we felt that the accountability was with the authorising officer, and that was the person who took responsibility.
Okay, so I'll put some questions to Mr. Johnson. That you were responsible for that contract?
Stephen Johnson, General Manager, Submarines. Yes, sir. And I'd like to clarify one item. The contract was $37,500. Newspaper articles were erroneous. There were two contracts, each $37,500.
So that's together for 2 months' work or 1 month's work?
Different time frames. Yeah.
Right, but the $37,500, was that for a month's work or 2 weeks' work?
It was for a period of time from January to, from March to June 16, and the total paid was less than $3,500.
Less than 3,000. Do we know? But how many hours of work or how many days of work was expected for those contracts?
So I'm going to have to ask if I'm allowed to both state the amount paid and the number of days, because then that leads to insight into this contract. Am I allowed to do that?
I don't necessarily want to know what was done. I just want to know the number of days work and the total pay.
Perhaps you take some advice from the Minister, Mr. Johnson, and then we can either
So can I just ask, what
13
Or the acting
days.
secretary.
Is that
then we can
13
either Provide
days?
the advice, or we can.
oh, I think
indicate.
we've got it, Chair. 13 days for how much? For the $37,500 or for the $75,000?
32.5.
So 13 days for 32,500, right?
Cheap.
Okay. No.
Not a day.
It's 13 days.
13 days.
It works out to about two and a half thousand a day.
Can I just, can you wind up now and I just move on to very, very diligent, as we always are in this committee, so if you can, if you last
Look, I do
question-
have more questions to ask
Well,
on
I'm
that.
sure you can come back
But-
later on, but at the moment, if you could wind up, and then I'll come back to you later on.
All right, can I just put this question to you that I'll have to
absolutely.
come back to this later on in the day?
No problem.
But it seems to me that you may want to take this on short-term notice, if you like, until the next, when I get opportunity to ask you these questions. My understanding is that if anything is under $80,000, it doesn't have to go to open tender, and anything, but once somebody has got a contract initially, then that rule, that $80,000 rule may not apply. And I just wanted to explore that as to how that actually works in the context of these contracts. So if I may be mistaken, but I would like to explore that, and I have some further questions about Mr. Gould's contract.
Thanks, Senator Xenophon, that's good, we'll come back to that in time. Senator Carr.
Got the cost of the suggested cost you have at this point for the repairs to the LHDs? Sorry?
Just get the correct officials back. I mean, we have Mr
Yeah,
Gillis
sure,
here, but
sure.
CN and Admiral Grunsel.
The cost of the repairs?
Senator Rear Admiral Adam Grunsel, Head of Maritime Systems. We don't have an actual cost at this stage because it's a flowing activity, and so it will be aggregated at the end of the activity or towards the end of activity. I can't give you the exact cost at this stage.
And how much have you spent so far?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator. We'd have to do some detailed analysis to determine how much we've spent to this point.
Right. There's a item here in the PBS on page 128. The project has a budget of $49 million. Is that for the repairs?
No, Senator. The repairs are not listed in the PBS.
I see. So what's the $49 million for?
I don't have that at my fingertips, what you're actually looking at there, Senator. I'll have to...
It's in the table.
Attachment B. Sorry, it was my attachment B, but PBS 128.
Yeah, just looking at it now, Senator. Yeah, it's okay. Senator, that $49 million relates to the acquisition project, which is Joint Project 2048, Phase 4 Alpha and 4 Bravo. The LHDs are now in service, and so they're maintained through an in-service arrangement where it's funded by the Chief of Navy through Mr Gillis to me. That money that you're looking at there, the $49 million, relates to the acquisition project prior to the delivery of the platforms.
Oh, I see. So what is the maintenance cost then for the vessels? Is there an aggregate maintenance cost?
Yeah, the maintenance costs of the vessel, Minister, are $106 million per year for the two vessels, plus support infrastructure and training equipment.
And so these repairs will be on top of that 116 plus infrastructure support?
Dependent, again, Minister, Senator, on how the repairs total up and indeed what the root cause is. And as we discussed earlier on, there will be potentially the opportunity for the Commonwealth to regain some of that from industry, should that be appropriate. Mm-hmm. If not, it will be taken on top of the 106. Some of it will be absorbed within the allocation inside the 106, which is allocated for corrective maintenance.
So you may in fact have to get an additional appropriation?
That's something I'd have to work with the Chief of Navy, and I'll defer to him.
We would work that within our current overall appropriation for the budget in defence, so it's not, wouldn't be additional money to our current budget.
Okay. So the look, there is this suggestion that's been propagated that the vessels were in fact, the vessels were driven too hard during the sea time that they've actually undertaken. Can you assure us that that's not the case?
Vice Admiral Tim Barrett, Chief of Navy. Senator, no, we've had a very deliberate, though ambitious, plan to prove their capability in their first 2 years. I will just go through the days spent at sea, which was a question you asked earlier. In 2016, both ships spent about 118 days at sea. And in 2017, up to the point where they returned to Sydney, Adelaide had spent 42 days, Canberra had spent 19 days. I would characterise it as us actually achieving more than we set out to achieve within those 118 days to prove the capability of the ship. We sent Canberra to Hawaii to go to exercise RIMPAC in 2016, and Canberra also went to Fiji as part of Fiji Assist, which again we used as a demonstration of the capability of the ship, which was to prove its humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. The issue that we have been balancing throughout its time is to make sure that we do not operate it beyond the sustainment for which we've been given funding for, and we expected that the ships, as a result of that ambitious program over the last year in proving their capability, that they would indeed spend time alongside in maintenance this year.
And of course you'd want to make sure you knew exactly what they could do and what they couldn't do, but is there suggestions that you are familiar with the claim that the vessels weren't run in properly? Vice Admiral, are you...
I'm not familiar with the claim they weren't run in properly. I'm aware of claims to say they've not been operated in the way in which they were designed,
yes.
To which I don't agree. We have trained we've been provided training by the companies that built and designed the ship. We have followed that training and we've operated it in the manner in which that training has directed us to operate it.
So you acted
That's
at
the
all
advice to me
times.
at this stage.
You acted at all times within the advice from the manufacturers.
That's the advice I've been provided, and I have no reason to doubt that
Well,
advice.
that's all you can do. It's I've used the term "run in." I'm a layman in this field, so tell me what's the technical term for running a vessel in?
Well, this is why, very importantly, in this case, the first 2 years of this ship's commission, we have a period of operational test and evaluation, and we are still conducting that at the moment. So it's not surprising that we have found issues during that period of test and evaluation.
Test and evaluation. So
yes.
You're absolutely, you can assure us that the vessels weren't run too hard.
I can assure you that we have managed the vessel in accordance with the original equipment manufacturer's detailed requirements for us to run it. I can assure you that the plan that we had and that we've executed did not seek to take the ships outside of their limits or beyond their sustainment means. What we have discovered during this period of test and evaluation is that in some cases we will find differences in how we expected it to operate from the way in which we have had to operate it.
So thank you. It's just there's a couple of, on the question of capability, Senator Gallagher asked some questions on this particular matter. Just we'll let him follow those through. This is in regard to the landing docks.
Yes. So the testing in relation to the Land 400 was successfully completed in 2016. So what did that successful mean?
Land 400?
We did actually load the two variants of Land 400 on the LHD. So that was a part of the evaluation.
These were the tanks, were they?
The
Boxer and the AMV 35.
The ASLAB replacement.
What date did you say, Senator?
So we asked some questions on those. Read the testing of the Land 400 Phase 2 vehicles, the Boxer and the AMV 35. And your answer was that the testing aboard HMS Canberra was successfully completed in December 2016.
Thank you.
So what does successful mean? I mean, did you...
It means that we have proven to ourselves what we set out to test. Now, I'm being cautious in what I say here, because you may find that we set out to test a vehicle to be, let's say, to operate from a landing craft in a certain sea state. You might find during testing that it will only operate to a lesser sea state, or you might have to take actions that you were not expecting for it to be able to operate at the required sea state. That is, you might not fill it with fuel or something along those lines. Okay. So to say that the testing complete was to show that we had successfully confirmed to our own satisfaction that we know the capability that can be provided by that vehicle in the landing craft.
However, Senator, we are in a down select in the Land 400 program, and I wouldn't want to encourage the officials to go into any further detail in the context of that than they already have.
Okay, but in relation to the ship, were you able to pass the strategic lift requirements?
We are yet to prove the ability to carry an Abrams tank. That was part of our planning last year. We intended to do it in May. But I think the ship was in Fiji, so it had to be delayed. We then had an issue with the availability of the ship and the tank later on in the year, so it was delayed further. It was intended to do it early this year. That's now been affected by the current delay. But we do have an ongoing requirement to test that particular element. That's one element out of a number.
So I think you're mixing different things here, though. So the Land 400 was a separate part of the Land 400 project to make sure vehicles could fit on the ship and manoeuvre around.
Yeah, but I think you said the ship went remarkably well, so we're just examining whether it went remarkably well at doing the job you bought it for, I suppose.
In fact, it has done remarkably well at what we bought it for.
Well, that's what you said.
There we go. Yeah.
So you can lift the vehicles, but you haven't been able to test them all.
No. Again, you're mixing things. So Land 400 are future vehicles as a separate project.
Yep. That
testing was done for the Land 400 vehicles. Chief of Navy can talk about the current fleet, the current vehicles, the current equipment that we carry on it.
Okay, so the current vehicles, did they pass the strategic lift requirements?
They have, with the exceptions I have indicated, for the Abrams, which we are still testing, because we have not yet been able to complete that testing.
Okay.
So when will you expect to conclude that test?
We will look at options in the latter half of this year. That said, we are already in the process of looking at alternate means by which we can deliver that capability through other means, other amphibious means, which is part of our case to show that there are many ways in which you can actually conduct the landing, not just with the ship that we bought.
So you haven't actually got an M1 Abrams tank strategically uplifted on an LCM-1E landing barge?
We've not proven that through its full range of capability. That's correct.
Is that because of slight to moderate seas, or is it?
Well, it's availability of the LHD and the LLC and the tank being available all at the same time.
So we haven't tested it clearly in light to moderate seas. It hasn't failed, we just haven't tested it.
Failed, we just haven't tested it.
Okay. And when do we expect to complete that test?
As I've said, we will look for opportunities at the end of this year. It'll be subject to, again, having tank, LLC and LHD together.
But at the moment they're in dock, so there's no...
Thank you.
One LHD is in a dry dock, yes.
So can I just then come back to this issue of how long it's going to take to have these vessels in full service? You're absolutely certain that we have the capacity at the dry dock in Sydney to repair both of them?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do, Senator. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the spare part capacity, you've said we've got capacity, we have one set of spare parts. We need how many?
Senator, what we're doing, firstly, Rear Admiral Adam Grunsel, Head of Maritime Systems, we have sufficient spares, test equipment, consumables in place now to conduct a full repair and full 5-year servicing on both pods in HMAS Adelaide, which is the ship that's in dock right now. And we'll have all of the associated equipment, spares, expertise in place for Canberra in the third quarter of this year, when she was due her 5-yearly service.
Right, so there's no delay as a result of not having sufficient capacity in terms of the spares?
There's no further delay. There was some delay between the initial activation of the problem in March through to being able to dock the ship on the 18th of May. It took us, we had many of the spares in place, many of the consumables, but mustering the rest of the international expertise, the equipment, the original equipment manufacturers' expert assistance and guidance, and some of the spare parts into one place all came together to allow us to dock on the 18th of May.
Is this because this delay, because you didn't anticipate both vessels being out of commission at the same time?
There is a usage upkeep cycle for the platforms that we ensure that all of the planning and the access to the spares is in place to adjust to that or to meet those requirements. The initial activation of the problem in early March in HMAS Canberra did mean that we would not carry, indeed, all of the spares that we required, that we are using at the moment for a normal 5-year service. So it's above and beyond. We are ensuring that what we do is we don't put the ship into dry dock and then have to wait there for several months after opening it up and determining that we need a particular part. We are gathering all of the requisite parts on site to be able to ensure that we can repair it as expeditiously as possible.
Rear Admiral, do you think there's any lessons to be learned from this experience?
There's many lessons to be learned, and I think not only for us but for industry as well. I think industry are very closely joined with us in an enterprise approach to this to understand exactly what the problem is and ensure we all gain the lessons.
In terms of the requisitioning of spares, what do you think the lessons are there?
I think lessons for us will be it's a matter of balancing requisition of spares and holdings versus the available money that's available to balance and to sustain these ships. And we're looking at we're talking about opportunities to maybe cross-level internationally with our partners in that area, where we might share spares and reduce the cost between both partners. But able to gain a greater access to those spare parts.
Do you think it would have made a difference if we built these vessels here?
Senator Kim Gillis, Deputy Secretary, Capability Acquisition and Sustainment. What would have happened is we would have, if we'd built them here, we would have been using the same pods. We don't manufacture those pods in Australia.
Would we have greater capacity to maintain the capability here?
If you'd built it here. So that, I don't want to speculate. It's a decision that was made in 2007. I'm not going to speculate what could have happened.
But I'm just arguing, I'm trying to come to terms with what are the lessons in terms of our capabilities, in terms of future shipbuilding.
I think the recent release of the Naval Shipbuilding Plan is an indicator that we are now going towards a national shipbuilding endeavour, a building in Australia of ships, of a range of fleets and submarines. So that's...
Is that one of the advantages, do you think?
There is an advantage in having some local manufacture because the supply chains are closer and more local. But when you start, in this situation, when you're looking at the manufacture of 4 pods for 2 vessels, that's not a sufficiently big enough demand to create an industry around.
Yeah.
So it would have meant the international industry of cruise ships and varying ships, that probably wouldn't have been a sustainable industry in Australia to manufacture. So there's trade-offs, and that's what we're going to have to confront over the next 50 years.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
Thanks, Senator Coe. I'll ask you to pause there, and I'll go to you, Senator Fawcett, if I can. Yeah, so,
Thank you very much, Chair. It's Mr. Pryor. Yeah.